everyone. Got two special guests to refer to this morning. The Minister, most obviously, I'm going to come back in a second. Can I also welcome particularly His Excellency the Ambassador of Japan, Kobayashi-san. Thank you. Thank you for coming. It's an honour that you're here. And Minister, we know above all how busy ministers are. We greatly appreciate your making the time to come and talk to us this morning. In addition to being the Minister of Energy and Resources, the Honourable Megan Woods is also the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration. There's quite a bit of work still to do, those of us from Christchurch, and the Minister of Research, Science and Innovation. That is a very full suite of portfolios. And
BEC, David.
Indeed. Indeed. So, and in her spare time, she's the Member of Parliament for Wigram. So, Minister, we appreciate your coming this morning. We're looking forward to your laying out in front of us the things that you're thinking about at the moment. The brief we gave the Minister is as broad and as neutral as that, partly because we thought that would provide a great deal of interest for people at the start of the year, but also in a sense reflecting the nature of this organisation. As I guess most people realise, we're not a policy shop, we're not a lobby group, we're more, I think, a forum that allows people to come and exchange ideas. Into that forum, we have quite a busy work program ourselves, in particular modelling work that's going on at the moment, designed to produce scenarios, economic or econometric modelling that will hopefully enable people to contribute to the debate about the directions the country should take. So, Minister, thank you again for coming. We look forward very much to what you have to say.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for having me along this morning. And David, thank you for that introduction. You live to your word that you've broken the politicians' pre-programming to speak for 10 minutes. So that's always good to see. I'd also like to acknowledge Executive Director John Carnegie, as well as His Excellency Ambassador Kobayashi from Japan, who I look forward to having further conversations with. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank NZX and Shane for hosting us here in this wonderful space this morning. Thank you very much for that. So, as David alluded to, the purpose of today is to give you an insight into my thinking about the energy portfolio over the coming year. This year is when we start pulling together the different threads of our policies and initiatives into the comprehensive work program. The work program is about enabling the long-term transition of our economy towards renewable energy. And it's about making sure that we continue to have a secure and affordable and sustainable energy sector over both the medium and the long term. And I want to acknowledge this organisation for the exceptional work you have done advancing thinking around the energy trilemma. I found your 2050 energy scenarios work a very helpful contribution to the evidence base, and I'm looking forward to the 2060 piece of work as well. We start from a good space. New Zealand is ranked 8th in the World Energy Council's Trilemma Index. As a government, we're ambitious for our energy system. We've set ambitious goals for our country, 100% renewable electricity by 2035 in a normal hydrological year, and a clean carbon neutral economy by 2050. Our work program this year is about how we move towards these goals and how it is that we do the year's progress that we need to do towards these goals. So today what I'm going to do is talk you through the different strands of our work program and show you how they all fit together and how they interact with other parts of our government's agenda and vision. And I want to show you where you fit, where you'll have opportunities to engage and be part of this program of work. Now let's see if I can, oh no, we're there. So first of all, the renewables strategy. So this is a major piece of work for us this year, is developing the renewables pathway that we need as a country. This is about this detailed strategic planning of how it is we chart our pathway to 2035, to 2050, and beyond. We're looking into the areas where government action can make the biggest difference, identifying the incentives that may be needed, the roadblocks that need to be removed, and how we can help New Zealand and how we can help new technologies come on stream. It's about what are the regulatory and policy settings our country needs to make the most of the opportunities around renewables. At a time when I'm hearing from business leaders that they want to invest in new generation, that the price signals are out there, we've got to make sure that we've got the settings right to enable that to happen. One issue that I hear a lot about, for example, is the issue of wind consents that might need to be reconsented because the technology has moved on so rapidly and the blade sizes are outside the terms of consent. That's an example of the kind of roadblock that we're currently looking at. Our aim is a series of cabinet papers and a renewable energy plan for public consultation this year. We look to work towards introducing legislation for 2020 in this area. Another integral part of work that in our work program this year is a green hydrogen strategy, which some of you in this room will have already engaged with officials from MB around. We're looking to go public with a green paper on this in the first half of this year about where we think the opportunities in this space are for New Zealand. We've got ARUP contracted to assist on this work, and we're making good headway with it. This is a contested space, and as you'd expect with any emerging technology, there are a range of views around it. And I think that is the exciting thing about new technologies. We've seen most recently the Concept Consulting report, which wasn't as bullish on the economics as some of the other reports that I've seen, for example. The UK Climate Commission in the UK was incredibly bullish, and we're seeing talk of $1 billion fund in Australia. So one of the things that certainly the concept report did, I think that everybody will agree on, is the fact that this is something that is happening and New Zealand can't afford not to be part of the conversation, and we need to be part of it. And for our government, being part of this international conversation and this international work is vitally important. And Ambassador, it is why last year I was so thrilled to sign the Memorandum of Cooperation with Japan in this area. There's a huge desire there to support an export industry here in New Zealand, and I look forward to working further with Japanese companies and the Japanese government around this program of work. This technology is developing fast. The work that I saw in this area that's developing in Japan is exceptional. I also last year visited Norway, and one company I visited there is doing some work and showing the costs of their electrolyzers for producing green hydrogen will be competitive with alternative non-renewable generation methods using steam methane reformers by 2020. So this is a space where the technology is certainly moving very fast. Combine that with cheap electricity renewable sources that we have here in New Zealand, and there are real opportunities. And this is what the white paper will set out and what we'll be able to have a conversation on. Key for me is making sure we're keeping pace with developments in this space and that we are poised to grab opportunities for what are there for us as a country. Okay, that's just a little bit out of sync. We'll just... Okay, another piece of work that we're doing, and that slide may come up later, is a resources strategy. We're working to provide stability and certainty for the resources sector as an element of the work program for 2019. A broad resources strategy will be developed to underpin the review of the Crown Minerals Act, the Tranche 2, which was programmed, I think, very well signalled, and I doubt there's anyone in this room that doesn't expect the Tranche 2 of the review of the Crown Minerals Act to happen this year. And this is focused on the government's long-term vision for the sector. This approach allows for targeted engagement with iwi partners and other stakeholders, including industry and environmental groups, of how New Zealand can sustainably derive value from its resources. Scope and timing are still being developed on this with officials, but I anticipate the strategy will be delivered before the proposed release date of the CMA discussion document in the second half of this year. And this, of course, comes off the back of our long-term decision around oil and gas consenting. I want to acknowledge that there were people for whom this decision is still a struggle. But we make no apology for having the courage to look beyond the 3-year electoral cycle and send a very clear signal about where the world is going and beginning to plan for it. There are certainly those who email and tweet me on a daily basis who don't think we've gone far enough and want to see far more drastic action in this area. I'm pretty sure David will concur with me that for a politician, when you've got both sides telling you haven't got far enough, you've probably landed about the right place. But we choose a long-term managed transition for this country. We very much see a role for gas and peaking through at least to 2035, and that is around how our decision was structured. We've protected the 100 square kilometres of existing permits, and many of these can run through to at least the 2030s and then have the possibilities of extensions. And the medium-term picture is firming up. We've seen Todd last year invest $100 million in a new gas peaking plant, which I had the pleasure of being at the opening at. We've seen OMV very recently talking about investing an extra $500 million in Taranaki, extending the life of existing producing assets. We've seen Methanex last week sign a long-term gas contract and announce that they're taking on 14 more staff on good salaries. Tamarin's got a strong 2019-20 drilling program at the Tui field. And we're proceeding with the onshore block offer. Since 2005, the commercial discoveries have all been onshore. And we've also made the offer to existing operators to discuss an extension to their drill or drop commitments. We've already had 12 operators respond, so that's an option around flexibility that people see as useful. It's also, we realised that business as usual in the context of change wasn't the best way to manage a long-term transition for those in the industry, that we needed to introduce some flexibility there. So it's been good to be able to get that work underway. And we're continuing to work on the discussion document for the No New Mines on Conservation Land commitment, which will be released in the coming months. So the other work that we're doing is, of course, around transition planning. And this is about actively planning for an economy that's going to look very different in 30 years' time. We've established a unit within MBIE to work in partnership with regional economies to do that on-the-ground transition planning, identify where regional economies have strength now, where there's opportunities for the future, what we need to do in terms of future workforce planning. Beginning in Taranaki, that's where we've got the team from MB working on the ground, led by Gus Charteris in his Just Transitions Planning Unit, and I'm sure many of you will have already had some interactions with Gus and the team. This year we'll see a draft economic roadmap for Taranaki produced in partnership with local leaders and community workshops. Hands-on public engagement with 24 workshops planned with locals. Last week, some of you would have heard a Radio New Zealand story that had some pretty practical people from the local community and industry talking about how useful they were finding these planning sessions. We'll have an update on the progress of this work, of course, at the National Just Transition Summit in Taranaki in May. The other piece of work, which I'm sure many in this room will be waiting for, is the electricity pricing room. The options paper is imminent, very imminent. And I know that this will generate debate, and I really encourage everybody to have their say. You've all seen the first report. Two things about the panel's work which I think stand out are the great engagement and real depth of data that they are using in there. It's coming off the best evidence we've had available to us. Two key things stand out for me: fair outcomes for consumers and future-proofing the sector are the two things that really stand out for me there. I'm on record as commending Meridian's decision to remove prompt payment discounts, which really are late payment penalties. Very interested in seeing how other ideas on how we alleviate energy poverty emerge from the options paper as that emerges. In terms of renewables and emerging technology, very keen to hear how you think we structure markets and regulations and policies to guide the next 30 years. So in terms of process, the option paper will be available very shortly. There will be a further round of public submissions on that, and we can expect a final report in May. We'll look to move to policy implementation in late 2019. We're not ruling out any more immediate changes if there's a strong consensus and opportunity that just emerges as a no-brainer from the work that comes out of that. But I think important for everyone to realise that the next stage is an options paper that prior to the release of the final report around that. Another piece of work that we are doing is Gas Act changes. And that's part of the medium-term picture in improvements to the Gas Act. It comes out of real concerns we had during the gas infrastructure issues of last winter. We've identified a need to improve communication between parties in the sector, especially in the event of unplanned outages. One thing to address, for example, is the low financial penalties that can be applied to industry participants during gas critical contingency events. The current maximum fine that can be imposed is $20,000 to failing to comply with gas curtailment orders, which is not in keeping with the maximum penalties applicable under similar legislation. For example, the equivalent under the Electricity Act is $200,000. So we need to think about how we can align these regulatory settings more. And a discussion document is expected to be released in March, so that's very soon, to seek submissions on potential changes to this legislation. We're also seeking stakeholder views on the suitability of the Act in regulating the use of emergent technologies and alternative fuels in New Zealand. Of course, hydrogen being one of those alternative fuels that we need to check in and check that our regulatory settings are right for future-proofing our system. Process heat. There's big opportunities for us here as a country in terms of our greenhouse gas reductions. 27% of all energy-related emissions and 34% of our energy consumption. It's an area where we see opportunities and a growing will from business to take action. Last year I had the pleasure to open Fonterra's bio-boiler, and there's really good discussions occurring about electrification with major players. I'm sure you'll see more of this throughout 2019. MB has published its technical paper last month, and it's currently accepting submissions on Friday. So if you're one of those people that leave your homework to the last minute, here's your chance. So one of the other critical pieces of work is backing emerging technologies. As well as the larger scale strategic work, there's tactical interventions we can make to support emerging technologies. The R&D tax incentive kicks off on 1 April, which is just 6 weeks away. We've had great engagement on developing phase 1 of the R&D tax incentive. This year we're rolling out our plans for how we treat pre-profit and loss-making companies, tax-exempt organisation, and the option for the future of tax loss cash-out schemes. And this is really important in terms of the emerging technology part of development, because many of those companies are pre-profit as they develop up the technology. And engagement on that phase 2 begins in a few weeks, and I really encourage you to be involved in the development of this. Some of the best innovation happens in the pre-profit phase, and it's vital for our energy system. It's fair to say that our energy sector as a whole has a very low level of investment in research and development, and that's something that I challenge all of you and encourage more of you to think about investing in R&D. We've also brought renewed focus to the Low Emissions Vehicle Contestable Fund, that this is a critical fund that we have in terms of making sure that we've got the infrastructure in place around low emission vehicles and EVs. Now this isn't just charging infrastructure. Those of us that drive electric vehicles, and I'm one of them, like to know that there's a good infrastructure of charging vehicles, but we've also funded things like the development of a qualification for mechanics working on electric vehicles, because it's quite a different skill. This is part of the planning we have to do in terms of workforce changes as we move towards a low emission economy, and make sure that we're equipping our workforce with the skills that will be required in the future. Of course, we are also using this fund to trial new technologies as proof of concept. There's the hydrogen project at the ports of Auckland, smart battery to home chargers for EVs with Vector, and EVs for heavy transport like Fonterra's milk truck. So this fund actually has a broad-ranging impact and is looking at a variety of areas. All up, we've put $17.2 million into different projects, backed by $45 million in matching fund from business partners. And I think that's a really good partnership between government and industry working together on some of these changes that we need to be looking at now and not waiting on. Round 6 will be opening soon. There's also, of course, the Provincial Growth Fund, which has recently included $1 million funding for looking at hydrogen in Taranaki. And this year we'll see the first projects rolled out through Green Finance Limited, so the Green Investments Fund and the kind of interventions that can make. So, of course, the allied work that's going on, a lot of the work that I'm talking about fits very closely and neatly with other programs of work in the government's work program, and that supports and underpins. One, of course, is the Zero Carbon Bill. The Zero Carbon Act will drive meaningful climate change and action in New Zealand. It sets out how we will get to zero carbon by setting legally binding long-term targets and establishing a 5-year carbon budget pathway. The Independent Climate Commission will guide the transition, and the government will be required to produce policy plans to meet carbon budgets. We expect to introduce legislation early this year and have it passed in the House in this calendar year. And of course, before we get to that point, the Interim Climate Change Committee has been considering how New Zealand can transition to 100% renewable electricity and more broadly to a low emissions energy future. The end of April, the ICCC will report back to the government on its recommendations. Once the ICCC's recommendations are available, the government will map out the next steps and make announcements in due course. So this is how our work program for 2019 fits together in the energy and resources space. It's comprehensive. It's about setting that detailed strategic work about how we move into an energy future that's built on greater renewables while ensuring affordability and security. Our plan is all about moving us towards that affordable renewable future, getting the high-level settings of policy and regulation right to move us in that direction, and making sure that consumers get a fair deal and the electricity market is structured right for that future. We're looking for opportunities to reduce emissions in the wider energy space. We're backing new technologies to help us get there, and we're planning to support our workers and our communities through this change with proactive regional development and transitions planning. So I hope this gives you a sense of the year ahead, where we are focusing and the type of future for our energy system we are working to build. And I look forward to working with all of you to make that happen. Kia ora koutou.
Minister, thank you very much. Minister has kindly consented to respond to a few questions or perhaps even brief comments. Could I ask that people introduce themselves briefly so that everybody knows who they are?
No questions.
Minister Dennis Barnes, CEO of Contact Energy. Sure.
Good to see you.
Recognise me.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My question's pretty simple. The ICCC has, in a couple of forums, suggested that the cost of moving to 100% renewable electricity is very expensive, and there may be better targets in the energy system overall.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you had anything to say about that. Minister Shaw has been reasonably open to that potential?
Yeah, and look, that's something that we are certainly looking at. We know, I don't see them as mutually exclusive discussions, actually. In order to get to one, you've got to get to the other. So I think that we'd be making a mistake to decouple them too much. That we see this very much in terms of the 2035 and the 2050 targets being inextricably linked, that the 2035 target is in a normal hydrological year. the 100% renewable target. So that there is an acknowledgement right up front in terms of the ambition and the goal that the government set, that we do see that there is a space for non-renewables in the pathway through to 2035. It's at 2035 to 2050 that we'll be needing to make a lot of those transitions. Now, of course, we're open to it not being quite as linear as that. If there's ways in which we can reduce emissions along the way. But I think one of the things is we're never going to get to the energy sector if we don't decarbonising our energy sector, if we don't give some thought to how it is that we structure and the regulatory settings that have to be there for our electricity sector in order to do that. Thank you. Hello.
Graham Peters from the Electricity Networks Association. We're waiting with bated breath the report on the options paper coming out. I think it's tomorrow. And we just wondered about one of the aspects of it, which is the low fixed charge. We're really optimistic that the panel might recommend the removal or the transitioning out of the low fixed charge regulations. 34 of the 38 submissions to the panel said that the low fixed charge had to go. I just wanted to say that the industry is right behind supporting the transition out of those regulations, and anything we can do to help in that transition, we will do. But my question for you is, what is the political process that kicks in after May 31 in some of these crucial areas, in particular around the potential removal of the low fixed charge? Will there be some sort of announcement later this year?
So yes, and we have a kind of a spot reserved in the legislative calendar later in the year if we have to introduce legislation to give effect to any of those. But just going back to the fixed charge, I'm not going to preempt anything that will be in the options paper because it's not the final report. It is just that. It is an options paper, and keen to hear more feedback from people. And of course, the pricing review is an independent process. But I think that everybody in this room is probably aware that all three parties who make up this government, as individual parties, had some policy around the need to modernise that charge. That it was enacted when we were last in government, and what I think that we're seeing is that in terms of driving the change, it may not be the most effective mechanism in terms of driving the change to people decarbonising the form of electricity going into their home. And I know, David talked about in my spare time, I'm the MP for Wigram. It's an electorate where a big part of my constituency work, as for most local MPs in winter, is people coming in with power bills that they can't pay. Now, these people don't live in modern, well-insulated houses with double glazing and small families, largely, that have these large power bills. So they're certainly paying a higher rate of electricity at the point where we have the greatest vulnerability and need. So it's fair to say that's something we're all very open in terms of what that process will be. So the options paper will come out. There'll be another chance for everybody to have their say. The review panel will then produce their final report. That will then come to me as the responsible minister. My officials will prepare some advice that will form the basis of a cabinet paper that will take to cabinet, and some decisions will be made from there.
Minister Greg Skelton, CEO Wellington Electricity. New Zealand's got an enviable record of renewables energy, and probably one of the top 3 countries that's getting close to 100%, sitting around 85 at the moment. Just wondering government's appetite to continue the electrification of transport fleets, and whether there's any sort of leadership opportunity you'd like to share with us this morning.
Yeah, so this is something that we're actively talking about, and we have a ministerial group because this falls across a range of portfolios. So the leadership comes from the transport portfolio. I have a part to play in that, largely through the low emissions contestable fund that falls under my leadership in terms of ECA and where that works in. But certainly we're in the middle of doing policy work around that. We need to make sure that we've got the infrastructure right. We also know that by and large New Zealanders buy second-hand cars. that not many New Zealanders go out and buy a brand new car. So one of the critical things is about making sure that we have a well-supplied second-hand car market. So that starts with us in some of the decisions that we make as government. We're one of the largest fleet purchasers, well, the largest fleet purchaser in the country. So there's some leadership we need to show around that. I've just written to a number of my entities that I have ministerial responsibility for, sharing with them our government's direction on this. So certainly there's a suite of policy options that are currently being worked through. I'm going to be back in time for caucus at this point.
Minister, there are worse places I could send you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Let me just share this brief thought with you, if I might. I said that we're not particularly a lobby group. I'm probably not stretching things too much if I suggest that in this audience there's a sympathy for markets as distinct from intervention, but a recognition that both are inevitable in a country as small as New Zealand. It occurs to me that the most important market is actually the market for ideas. It's the debate that needs to occur, the contest of ideas, and in that respect, like any other market, the contest of ideas depends on transparency and good information. Thank you this morning for contributing to both.
Great,
we
thank
do
you.
appreciate your time.
Thank you, David.